They're on to me, dude. These guys are as sharp as nails out there. You can't put anything past them. Oh my god, dude, I am freaking out. I'm so stressed out. I feel like I'm gonna have a panic attack.
You wanna talk about stress? You wanna talk about stress? Okay, I stumbled onto something huge, a conspiracy even. How about that for stress?
The hell are you even talking about?
The world is being misled, Jules, and I got a paper trail to prove it. Check this out. Take a look at this.
Jesus Christ, Alyssa.
So that right there is Tom. Now let's talk about Tom. Can we talk about Tom? Please, please, Jules. I've been dying to talk about Tom with you all day, okay? The best Spider-Man. This idea keeps coming to me over and over again every day. The best Spider-Man, the best Spider-Man. Keeps coming back to me. I look through these submissions and it's filled with Andrew Garfield as the answer. So I say to myself, I gotta find the guy. I do research to find him, and what do I find out, Jules? What do I find out? There is no best Spider-Man. The man does not exist. So I decide, oh, nobody. I gotta dig a little deeper. There's no best Spider-Man, you gotta be kidding me. I got submissions full of Andrew. All right, so I start looking through my research until my subconscious knocks me in the head saying, Tobey, he's gotta be the best Spider-Man. My mind opens up to the thought, and what do I find? There's not a single thing that backs it up. Jules, half of these concepts and ideas have absolutely no evidence.
Okay, Alyssa, I'm gonna stop you right there. Not only does the best Spider-Man exist, it's clearly Tobey. That's all everybody is ever talking about.
Jules, you small-minded fool. Don't you see? The answer is right in front of us. They're all the best Spider-Man.
What? What are you even talking about? That's impossible.
They're all the best Spider-Man. Hi, my name is Alyssa Nichols, and welcome to my YouTube channel. If you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much for joining me again. I'm aware that I look a little, different, but I'm so happy you returned. I know it's been a little while since I've uploaded, but you can blame it on school, college applications, and my crippling procrastination. But for today's video, I'm gonna be talking about why exactly all 3 live-action renditions of Spider-Man are the best in their own beautiful way. I've been wanting to make this video for about a year now, and there's no better time to make it than right now. For the past few months, I've been prompted to make this video due to so many opinions being thrown around over the internet and social media. As a huge Spider-Man fan myself, seeing the unfair comparisons between the 3 are breaking my heart, and it's annoyed me ever since it became a thing. These 3 wonderful actors have been pitted against each other for the past 5 years, and I've genuinely had enough. For the past 2 months, I've revisited The Amazing Spider-Man and the Ultimate Spider-Man comics for the first time in forever in order to do some research, and it's been unbelievably fun looking into a deep dive of Peter's character. To me, I think the Spider-Man fandom has become so toxic, and I'm just here to explain and say my piece as to why each live-action cinematic version of Peter Parker is the best in their own way, no matter what anyone else thinks. The one and only Tobey Maguire. The original, the first, the vets. For Tobey's section of the video, I would say it's probably going to be the shortest segment of the 3. Why, you may ask? Well, it's a little hard to explain when he's the most beloved of the 3 from the general public for obvious reasons. The original Spider-Man film starring Maguire was quite literally a cultural reset, that's undeniable. It's what made non-comic book readers fall in love with Spider-Man in the first place. It was a huge hit that helped change the perception of superheroes to the world back in the early 2000s. Everyone was trying to make a superhero movie that was trying to be a wannabe version of the film itself, failing to capture its amazing essence. Tobey's films were and are still loved by the public so much that it's had a huge effect on the world by changing the perception of Spider-Man. Now, yes, while he's incredibly liked for his portrayal as Peter Parker / Spider-Man, of course there are gonna be the select few that choose to discredit him for his work. So first, let's just talk about comic accuracy for a second. As far as origins go, Tobey's origin is closest to Amazing Fantasy 15. His fighting style is accurate. I mean, the action sequences are beyond perfect, especially the train sequence with Dr. Octopus. He even successfully captured the cartoonish vibe from both the Steve Ditko era and the John Romita Sr. era. There's even a perfect side-by-side comparison between J. Jonah Jameson telling Peter his photos are crap from Ultimate Comics.
They're crap. 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 Mega crap.
And as the final kicker, the whole plot of Spider-Man 2 comes directly from issue 50 from The Amazing Spider-Man, Spider-Man No More. Now, yes, I could just sit here and tell you how Tobey's Spider-Man is comic accurate by giving you a side-by-side comparison to the comic panels, but that's not really what this video is about. Being comic accurate is not a defining factor of what makes a good Spider-Man a good Spider-Man. This version of Peter Parker that Tobey Maguire plays is a huge dork, and you can't really help but love him for it. He's definitely the nerdiest of the three, and does an amazing job in capturing this side of Peter. In all three films of the trilogy, one would expect him to get more game, but that dorky, endearing attitude stays with him all the way till the end. Sure, this trait that Maguire portrays isn't comic accurate, but it's a great addition to his character that makes the audience root for him even more. And I know some movie watchers are probably looking at me like I'm crazy right now, wondering why Peter being nerdy isn't accurate. But that's who he is! Peter being nerdy is the basis for his personality. No. If we're going by accuracy, in the Amazing Spider-Man comics, the classic era, Peter is definitely a young man who excels higher than others at school, top of his class, but he grows out of that stage really fast. Peter becomes confident, cocky, and resents his classmates looking down on them. His attitude can really be summed up to "you're gonna work for me one day" towards his classmates in high school. But as far as dorkiness goes, that doesn't last for really long. Even in the Ultimate Comics, Peter grows out of his dorkiness by the first couple issues. But here's the thing, if there's a change that's gonna be made to a character that actually works, to me that's what really matters. The audience reacted to Peter being nerdy perfectly, and so this change created a staple for Peter Parker's character forever. Sure, Peter's character isn't near as geeky as Maguire's version, but it works and it resonates with the audience. I mean, if you really want to get into it, a lot of changes were made, but these were changes that sat well with the public. Maguire's version also had the advantage by being the first, kind of how I mentioned earlier. By being the first, this creates the idea of Peter Parker that stays with the public forever, no matter if it's good or bad. But often, this can cause a negative effect that I often see displayed by Sam Raimi fans, where nostalgia can start to cloud judgments. All of a sudden, if Peter isn't miserable, it's not accurate. If Uncle Ben isn't mentioned multiple times, it isn't accurate. If Peter isn't insanely socially awkward and nerdy, it isn't accurate. Yet, these were all changes that were made by the Sam Raimi franchise to differentiate Peter Parker from Peter Parker. People are shocked every day whenever I mention the fact that Uncle Ben was only in like 5 panels in Peter's origin story. Even going on forward with his future, Peter mentioned Uncle Ben barely. The Raimi trilogy gave Uncle Ben a much more important role in Peter's story, overall going on as Spider-Man, and that's not a bad thing at all. Okay, now to fully jump back onto the subject of Tobey, there's so many positives that I just have to point out. Tobey's version of Peter is just someone you have to root for. How? Well, it was also a spot-on display of Parker luck. Peter's always been known to have the typical fortune in which, for just a split moment, everything looks like it's gonna work out for the guy until the absolute worst thing that could happen happens due to the choices he makes. Or, quite literally, just because. His poor luck was probably best shown in Spider-Man 2 when everyone is borderline pushing Peter into Joker territory. I think just one scene from Spider-Man 2 sums up his luck to a T. Oh my god. Near the beginning of the film, Peter has to take pictures for the Daily Bugle for J. Jonah Jameson's son, the astronaut, in celebration of his achievements. But in the span of just 2 minutes, Peter fails to get one drink at the planetarium, his best friend publicly calls him out, punches him, the woman of his dreams gets engaged right in front of him, and he has to capture the perfect picture in this miserable moments. The writers put Peter through the ringer multiple times when it came to his luck, and I think he was perfectly shown in this film. The way Tobey has that lingering sense of hope just for something to go his way for once, only for it to blow up in his face. It's perfect. And due to always having misfortune, Tobey captured the bitter side to Peter, the side that's often resentful towards others due to everything constantly not going in his favor. So for brief moments within the film, we get to see the human flaws that Peter has. A typical flaw such as selfishness. We finally witness Peter's selfish side when he talks to Mary Jane after watching her Broadway show. Their conversation can probably be summed up to Peter literally inviting MJ into a love affair despite the fact that she's newly engaged, completely gaslighting her for his own benefit. He tries to subtly show her that he's a changed man after giving up the responsibility of being Spider-Man. And he even displays arrogance for a bit in Spider-Man 3. Okay, wait, I know you guys are gonna say, but Alyssa, it was the symbiote, it wasn't his fault. Great point. But let me leave you with the scene where he talks to Sandman at the end, owning up to all of his responsibilities for his actions despite being under the symbiote's influence.
I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want you to understand. done terrible things too.
Sure, Spider-Man 3 isn't exactly the best piece of work to reference, but the arrogance is still there. Now, as far as relatability goes, which is the permanent trait that stays with Peter Parker forever, Tobey does an excellent job in connecting with the audience. He's socially awkward,
Pizza time.
tries to win the affection of the woman he loves by trying to get a cool car or learning bad poetry. He's also very much broke. While not a typical trait for superheroes to have, Maguire identifies with such a large portion of the audience by not being able to do something as simple as paying his rent. And sure, his Spider-Man isn't super quippy or constantly makes jokes, but he makes up for it in his selflessness, showing the true hero side of Spider-Man. The Spider-Man that risks his life for others no matter the cost. God, I mean, one of two of my favorite scenes in the entire trilogy revolves around him running to a burning building to save a little girl, despite his powers being non-existent at the moment. And by Peter constantly giving back to New York, getting nearly zero thanks back, it results in one of my other favorite scenes, the train scene. I think the reason why people hold Spider-Man 2 in such high regards is because of this scene alone. After the insanely hardcore battle with Dr. Octopus, saving the people on the train from falling off the edge, the audience expects the citizens just to let Peter fall over the edge after all of his hard work, and yet this idea is quickly thrown out of the window as they try to save him right before his descent, with Peter being completely vulnerable without the use of his mask, only for the citizens on the train to carry him back on, keeping his identity a secret. It establishes the heart. The core of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man is beautiful and revolves around the idea of believing in hope, no matter how many times the world completely knocks you down. Tobey Maguire is one of the best Spider-Man, and that's completely undeniable. So before I start Andrew's section of the video, I just have to share something. When I was actually going to get photos of Tobey, Andrew, and Tom printed out, the employee actually asked me who my favorite Spider-Man was, and naturally, I said all of them with my whole chest. And he decided to reply, I don't know. You can't really count in Andrew. He doesn't really compare to the other two. He's kind of the weakest of the three. And my god, my heart broke into a million little pieces. So let me just say this from now, to set the record straight. Andrew Garfield was an amazing Spider-Man and Peter Parker. Why do I say this? Well, often, if you've been living under a rock, Andrew has been cited as giving a great performance as Spider-Man, but not a good Peter Parker. It is insane how far from the truth that is. Because of how passionate I can get when talking about Andrew's version, people often assume that Andrew is my favorite Spider-Man, which I can understand. I can see how my words and my actions can make it seem as though. However, this is very much untrue, as I've stated before. All three of these men are my favorite version of Spider-Man, despite how disingenuous that sounds. However, out of the three, I probably defend Andrew's version the most due to how much crap he gets. The amount of slander Andrew Garfield gets while putting on a spectacular performance is just so absurd. To me, he was an amazing Peter Parker stuck in a film series with bad writing, which isn't his fault in the slightest. So before I go on a whole rant about it, let's get into it. So let's talk about comic accuracy for a second. For Andrew's section, talking about comic accuracy is important because often non-comic book readers tear down his performance by claiming he was nothing like his comic book counterpart. I'm here to tell you that those people have absolutely no idea what they're talking about and should never open their mouths again. I'm kidding. No, but seriously, some of you watching may be shocked after I say this, but if anything, Andrew's version is actually a lot like classic Peter Parker. While I revisited the Amazing Spider-Man comics these past few weeks, I was actually a bit shocked myself. Based off of memory, Andrew had always reminded me of Ultimate Peter, which he still does of course, but only now, classic Peter shines out to me now more than ever. Anyways, due to the cancellation of Spider-Man 4, the Amazing Spider-Man film was already slandered from the very start. It was already losing its fair chance the second it began. This began the constant comparisons between the two on a very, very regular basis. Let's talk about the most common comparisons that can be backed up with evidence from the comics itself. On a cynical level, this is probably my favorite line that people use when describing Andrew. Anytime he's referred to as too cool, I can't really help but roll my eyes. In this new rebooted version of Spider-Man, Peter shows traits of being cool by having a skateboard, showing up flashing basketball, not wearing glasses on a regular, dating the smartest girl in his class. And let me shut all of that down in 2 seconds for you. In the Amazing Spider-Man comics, Peter quickly grew out of this nerdy and dorky persona in the early issues while he was still in high school. In the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, he actually gained a whole spot on the basketball team during the origin period. He stopped wearing his glasses by issue 8 in the classic comics. He had both Liz Allen and Betty Brant advancing towards him romantically in the early issues, and oh my, for God's sake, Peter had a motorcycle in the early years of college. This Peter was more of an outcasted nerd than a dorky one, which honestly in retrospect reminded me a bit of classic Peter Parker. Sure, in the comics, Peter was always top of his class, teacher's favorite, showed a higher interest in science than others, but he was often bullied and made fun of for having this stuck-up attitude that he was better than everyone else. I thought Andrew showcased this in a stellar way, and I was shocked at the negative reaction he received due to how accurate it really was. And as far as not being nerdy or smart enough, what in the world are you talking about? This is the only version of Peter Parker that we as an audience have seen create his own web shooters, which of course many people complained over with the idea that he was supposed to have little slits in his wrist to shoot webs. Why is that the preferred choice? But besides that, he was able to formulate an equation that Dr. Connors couldn't figure out, the trials he went through to create electric-prone web shooters, the little trinkets around his room that he made, such as a device to do something as simple as open the door without getting up and doing it yourself, and all of the research that he did to figure out more about his dad and the spider formula history. No, I have to take a breather for this, I'm sorry. And as far as actually showing off his intelligence to others, I thought this was done quite accurately, where it was brought up more as a fun fact rather than a nerd just nerding out. When Peter displayed this intelligence, it was almost always treated as more of a fun fact. Lord have mercy, I don't have an aneurysm by the end of this video. This section can actually tie in with the Uncle Ben, so let's get into it.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Some of y'all about to be real mad. Uncle Ben did not coin one of the most iconic lines in superhero history. I know, yeah, shock. In Amazing Fantasy 15, Spider-Man's origin story, the character who actually says the iconic line isn't a character at all. It's the narrator in the final panel. It wasn't until the Sam Raimi franchise when this phrase would be uttered by Uncle Ben, which stayed ingrained within the audience members forever. The reason I bring this up is to talk about the great responsibility scene done in Andrew's film.
Listen to me, son.
Yeah, go ahead.
You're a lot like your father. You really are, Peter, and that's a good thing. But your father lived by a philosophy, a principle, really. He believed that if you could do good things for other people, you had a moral obligation to do those things. That's what's at stake here. Not choice, responsibility.
That's nice. That's great. It's all well and good, so where is he?
What?
Where is he? Where's my dad? He didn't think it was his responsibility to be here to tell me this himself.
Oh, come on, how dare you?
How dare I? How dare you?
Where are you going? Peter, come back here, please.
Not only is it just nearly word for word, but it takes a scene straight out from the Ultimate Comics for Peter to face the concept of responsibility. You have to understand that in the Ultimate Comics, Uncle Ben was way harsher on Peter than any other version had shown, so the whole great responsibility thing didn't resonate with Peter well due to Uncle Ben using his father's words against him in a very tough situation, causing a really bad outburst from Peter. I remember watching that scene for the first time in realization that this new storyline and overall theme reminded me of the Ultimate Comics. So by taking plot points and specific panels straight from the comic series, I watched the rest of the film in amazement over Andrew's performance when it highlighted irresponsibility. In just the beginning stage of becoming Spider-Man, Ultimate Peter had no chill at all whatsoever. Like I mentioned before, he joined the basketball team for his own benefit despite having these newfound powers, giving him an unfair advantage over others, as well as putting himself in danger by causing questionability from others as how he's suddenly amazing at the sport. And If we're circling back to the basketball scene from the film where he destroys Flash, it's often regarded by many that Peter would never do such a thing. He's a saint. To those same people, may I just ask, where was that energy where Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man took out Flash? But anyways, in regards to hurting Flash, classic Peter quite literally went into a wrestling match with him and completely knocked him out in issue 8. Peter being irresponsible as Spider-Man in the beginning is accurate, but audience members weren't ready to face this reality that Peter suffered with the exact same flaws that us regular folk deal with on a daily. Also, the whole he told Gwen he was Spider-Man too early. Ultimate Peter told MJ he was Spider-Man in issue 13. I don't want to hear it. The kid was eager. Plus, I think the poor guy learned his lesson the second he heard her neck snap. By getting over this concept of irresponsibility, we the audience watch him learn from his mistakes and mess-ups through the films. It takes a while for Andrew's Spider-Man to become a hero, and it's exactly the same in both classic and Ultimate Spider-Man. Anyways, let's get away from this whole comic accuracy thing, because that's definitely not all I want to talk about. Peter Benjamin Parker has a lot of flaws, and that's okay. If anything, that's part of the reason why I love Peter so much in the first place. He sticks out to me apart from so many other heroes due to his overall attitude and personality. He's far from this perfect person that people have cemented in their minds, and it's amazing. Andrew manages to perfectly highlight Peter's humanity, his flaws. The flaws that the comics, especially classic Peter Parker, portrayed so much of. He's snarky, he's sarcastic, hot-headed, arrogant, cynical, and even rude at times. Because these realistic flaws weren't fully portrayed by Tobey, who delved more into Peter Parker's dorky side, this immediately led audience members to believe that this new arrogance was completely out of character for Peter Parker as a person, when this entirely isn't true. God, I mean, in his classic origin story, he said, "The rest of the world could hang for all I care." Peter. The more I think of it, the more I think I gain most of my hot-headed attitude and moodiness from that version of Peter the most. And not only are his flaws portrayed immaculate, but the relatability of it all is just so good. The sheer awkwardness of him just talking to Gwen in the beginning period leaves you squirming. Just to touch on Gwen Stacy for a moment. Queen. Andrew's version of Peter Parker really showed how whipped and love-struck Peter can be when in love. The relationships shown between Gwen Stacy was incredible. The chemistry between the two is something we'll never see again in Hollywood. Their relationship was definitely the heart of the film. And say what you will about The Amazing Spider-Man, but absolutely nothing can touch Gwen Stacy's death sequence. I still haven't recovered from it. 11-year-old me was traumatized for months. Finally, Andrew Garfield's version of Spider-Man. Wow. The quips. Okay, so Andrew's portrayal of Spider-Man jokes and quips are so beyond spot on. I mean, it was the first time we ever saw this constant joking side of Peter as Spider-Man in film. His quips are exactly like Ultimate Spider-Man's. I could read both the comics and watch the film side by side, genuinely laughing out loud over Peter's antics under the mask. I'll never forget watching that car thief scene for the first time though. That scene was gold.
Just let me go.
Is that a knife? Is that a real knife?
Yes, it's a real knife.
My weakness, it's small knives.
Just let me go.
Anything
okay?
but knives! Oh, it's so simple.
I felt as if Ultimate Spider-Man walked straight onto the screen, sharing his insanely lame but hilarious jokes. The complete immatureness of him and his body actions alone, along with his language, screamed accuracy. And it was everything I could have hoped for in a rebooted version. And as far as body movements and choreography goes, his fighting style, just the way he moves, is spectacular. I'd also like to point out that this version of Peter also heavily reminded me of the actual spider in Spider-Man. Let me explain. During the battle with the lizard at school, he webs him up and quite literally crawls over him like a spider, or when he's shown sleeping in the ceiling, like most spiders do in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Now, to wrap up this section, I just need to reiterate the fact that Andrew Garfield is in fact a great Peter Parker and a great Spider-Man too, despite people only vouching for his version as Spider-Man. In these past recent months though, it's been pretty heartwarming to see people nowadays appreciate his performance, as they should. Lately, I've seen so much appreciation for 3 of my favorite scenes in the entire film series, when Peter saves the kid from the burning car, reiterating the idea that anyone can wear the mask, making Peter become a hero right there and then for the first time. Peter running off the building after getting shot as a couple civilians helping out, giving back to their great hero, and as Peter sucks up all the pain, running across the pavement, getting stronger with each stride taken. And of course, the ultimate appreciation of Gwen Stacy's death scene. I'm not even gonna go into that. That scene speaks for itself. Sure, Andrew didn't have the strongest films of the three, but that doesn't make him any less amazing than he already was. And last but not least, we have Tom Holland, the current Spider-Man taking a role within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Out of all three versions, I have to say, this one definitely gets the most mixed opinions. For the past few years, I've heard Tom is the perfect blend of Peter and Spider-Man, taking the best parts of Maguire and Garfield's performance. But in these past few months, the Tom Holland hate train has been busy and booming, and I genuinely can't wrap my head around as to why. So let's talk about major criticisms and let me annihilate them. This phrase probably annoys me just as much as the whole too cool thing with Andrew's version. Ever since the release of Civil War back in 2016, I've heard this phrase tossed around constantly. I thought it was cute at first, but that part of me has since died. I truly don't understand as to why people can't see what's really going on here with the whole Tony Stark mentor thing. Sure, Peter having someone to look up to, even as a father figure, is a new concept. But in the classic Spider-Man comics, I've realized that lately, people often forget that he had the exact same attitude towards the Fantastic Four, and specifically took interest in Johnny Storm. And I think in the very first issue of The Amazing Spider-Man, Peter tried joining the Fantastic Four himself, desperate to be a part of their team since he looked up to them so much. Clearly, the Marvel Cinematic Universe used Tony Stark to replace Peter's admiration for the Fantastic Four, since it was during the early stages in becoming Spider-Man, and for obvious reasons, the MCU didn't exactly have the power to introduce the Fantastic Four within the universe. And to divert from the whole Iron Boy Jr. thing, wasn't that the whole point of Far From Home? In Far From Home, it revolves around Peter diverting from this idea that society is pushing on him to become the next Iron Man, taking his place as successor. Throughout the entire film, Peter struggles with having to live up to everyone's expectations of him to take Tony's spot. But when we reach his lowest point, after he just got an extreme beatdown by Mysterio, it establishes that Peter will never be Tony. And Peter realizes that that's okay. Through this conversation with Happy Hogan, it perfectly deconstructs the belief that Peter is supposed to live in the shadow of Iron Man forever. I felt that the most subtle way this was done, and comedically so, was when Peter began making his suit and Happy put on a song from AC/DC. Only Peter mistook the song being from Led Zeppelin. To me, it just shows that Peter is in fact a very different person than Tony Stark. So personally, to me, the whole Iron Boy Jr. thing just becomes unjustified. Immediately incorrect. He fashioned his first ever suit, the homemade one, but of course that's not what everyone's criticism is talking about. I'm not an idiot. It's the fact that Stark created the comic accurate suit. Well, okay, but let me give you this. In the Ultimate Comics, Peter technically didn't make his suit either. He was given a red and blue jumpsuit with those iconic white eyes, only he added the webbing and symbol later once he took on the superhero mantle as Spider-Man. Also, he quite literally made his suit in Far From Home, and just because it's through the use of technology doesn't mean it doesn't count. The world MCU Peter Parker lives in is rich with technology. How can he not? And can you blame him? Do you guys remember what it's like to be a teenager? Because I'm there right now, and yikes. A consequence that a teenager experiences can look very different from a consequence that an adult experiences. Tom Holland is able to perfectly capture the stresses and tribulations that a teenager deals with on a normal day-to-day, despite having amazing abilities. Tom's version of Peter Parker highlights the struggle in choosing Spider-Man responsibilities, or to be a normal teenager and having a social life. Just some scenes to point out. In Homecoming, Peter struggles with the idea of using Spider-Man as a party trick to impress his classmates, boosting his social status. Another scene in which, by not owning up to the responsibilities of rejoining the decathlon team, the Chitauri Crystal ends up being a bomb, causing him to struggle in keeping everyone at the monument safe. I mean, he quite literally got detention for ditching the competition, got his suit taken away from him for engaging in the ferry issue, and how could we forget him being snapped away for sneaking onto the ship to go to Titan in Infinity War. No real consequences or struggles, you gotta be kidding me. That's such like a horrible mindset to have when describing Spider-Man. As of late, I've noticed that most Tobey Maguire fans constantly rag on Tom's performance with the notion that he's not miserable enough to be Peter Parker, and oh my god, it's horrible. Why does Peter have to be miserable in order to be called an accurate portrayal of Spider-Man? Peter has definitely been down in the dumps over the years as Spider-Man, but that doesn't mean he felt that being Spider-Man was a burden all the time. Peter doesn't have to hate being Spider-Man. This is especially supported by the classic Ditko era. Peter felt as though being Spider-Man was an escape, especially in the early issues. If you really want to go by that logic that he's supposed to hate being Spider-Man, in Far From Home, he doesn't even take his Spider-Man suit with him on vacation since he wanted to get away from the whole superhero world for a bit. And if extreme Sam Raimi fans want to go by that idea that Peter isn't allowed to be happy, then why do we as an audience enjoy the end of Spider-Man 2 so much, the strongest of the trilogy by far? After all the struggles he endured throughout the film, he finally wins the affection of the woman he loves and swings away to fight crime as Spider-Man in enjoyment. If we can wholeheartedly praise this, why should Tom's version of Peter being happy at the end of Homecoming be a bad thing? And judging in comparison to Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man Far From Home, I just find it interesting how people haven't seen the similarities between the two. Far From Home often reminds me of both Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man No More, by highlighting the theme of Peter wanting to let go of the Spider-Man mantle so he can enjoy his life for a second. Both Tobey and Tom face a villain who challenges them to go beyond himself as a person. If you really aren't aware as to what Parker luck is, let me give you a very brief summarization. Peter Parker is known for having some of the worst luck in comic book history, where the absolute worst thing that could happen happens, and Peter is always on the receiving end of it, even if he didn't cause it. I'm just gonna call out a couple instances where Tom's version went through Parker luck because oh my god, it's so bad. The father of the girl he likes was quite literally revealed as the Vulture. Karen messed up his web settings before engaging in action, blowing his cover. When he had to sit next to Mr. Harrington on the flight after trying to sit next to MJ, when Brad took a picture of Peter half undressed for Spider-Man responsibilities, when he got hit by a train, and the whole theme in Far From Home, he's just trying to ask out the girl he likes only for the universe to say, no. It's giving
share.
It's giving delusional. Tom's films are so emotionally honest about the awkward struggles of growing up, which is one of the key themes about Spider-Man as a character. Change. Stan Lee helped create the character of Peter Parker / Spider-Man for kids and teenagers to have a hero that they could relate to, since at the time, they were only sidekicks. The very idea of Spider-Man being a teenager was even laughed off, treated as a complete joke. And in creating Peter, Stan Lee had the intention of giving him personal problems in which the audience could relate to. To me, what makes the character of Spider-Man so incredible is that his character can completely change depending on his environment / time period. Tom's version of Peter Parker is probably the one I relate to the most out of the three due to his youth. To watch this version of Spider-Man ever since I was in 6th grade to now where I'm a senior in high school, I found myself resonating with the issues or casual problems he would face. He shows off this relatability by being hesitant in going to a party with his classmates, getting nervous when asking out his crush in Homecoming, not knowing how to drive for his life, creating an elaborate plan that only blows up in his face for the girl he likes, and having a cute but painfully awkward first kiss. As a teenager myself, it's just so refreshing to have a high-quality character that I can see in myself capturing the high school experience to a T. And if you think about it, that's almost exactly what Stan Lee's goal was in creating him. He was in the academic decathlon team. I'm not going into depth with this one. As one final criticism that's pointed out by the general public, I've seen multiple complaints saying that this Peter Parker is stuck in a film with way too many jokes and humor. And it's like, you guys, how can you say this, but you turn around and say that Spider-Man 2 is a masterpiece, but that film is a comedic goldmine? Nowadays, I feel as though people walk into a Spider-Man movie expecting a bunch of angst and misery, so they end up being disappointed when they were given so much joy instead through comedy. What a lot of people don't understand is that Peter Parker's life as Spider-Man and his life as, well, Peter Parker were two very different worlds. In the Amazing Spider-Man comics, Peter's life was lighthearted and comedic, and surprisingly full of sitcom-like gags. This was especially done during the Steve Ditko era, and when I say sitcom-like gags, I often mean jokes that you could quite literally find out of a sitcom from like that 70s show. And I'm talking gags in regards to Flash's love for Spider-Man, Peter's classmates picking on him, or any interactions with J. Jonah Jameson. I think people who often criticize Tom's version for being so campy and comedic really need to pick up any of the early issues from the Steve Ditko era, because my god, you are really missing out if you think Peter Parker's life is only full of doom and gloom. I can't tell you how many times I found myself genuinely laughing out loud these past couple weeks rereading. Implicitly Pretentious does an amazing job at going into depth with this through their video talking about Spider-Man in high school. I'll leave their channel linked down below because all of their videos are quality at its finest. Now, while Peter's life follows the comedic side, Spider-Man's life is full of mystery and full of drama and solving situations. Since Peter lives a double life, obviously these lives would have to be portrayed in two very different ways. When it comes to the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, Peter's life as Spider-Man was often treated as a detective search for clues towards a bigger situation at hand. I thought the way Tom's version handled this was just stellar. In the Ultimate comics, when Peter interrogates the villainous group, the Enforcers, it's so lame, and it's clear that Peter has absolutely no idea what he's doing. And in Homecoming, it's a perfect parallel to this when he interrogated Aaron for more information. This was clearly done to show just how inexperienced he is at the whole superhero thing. I don't understand why the general public is expecting this version of Peter Parker to know exactly what he's doing when he's still just a kid. A 15-year-old one at that too. Homecoming itself is supposed to show the rookie period of being Spider-Man, and to me it's just so well done. The MCU Spider-Man is all about societal pressures, and to focus on the whole Spider-Man persona for a second, it's very clear that this Spider-Man mirrors Ultimate Spider-Man, which is the quippiest and the funniest in my opinion, especially within the early issues. The way he also interacts with the Avengers in Civil War was also spot on in comparison to the Ultimate Spider-Man. In the Ultimate comics, he often played a small part when interacting with the other characters in big storylines, so it was such a fresh breath of air to actually see Peter just in the same room with everyone on screen for the first time. I mean, you guys, for the first time ever, we're seeing a Peter Parker sharing a screen with other characters outside of the Spider-Man universe. That's huge! And just a few things to point out in comparison to accuracy for a hot second. The lengths he went through to protect his secrecy was perfect pertaining to all the comics. The bank robbery scene in Homecoming could come straight out of the Ultimate storyline, and just the beginning sequence of him in the neighborhood just trying to help whoever he can just very much highlights the whole friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. And of course, how can I forget the end of Homecoming where Peter has to lift up all the rubble off of him? Probably one of my all-time favorite scenes of the MCU Spider-Man. Not only was that scene straight out of issue 33 from The Amazing Spider-Man, but the relatability of it is shockingly beautiful and obviously alarming due to how realistic it sounds of someone panicking, and not just someone, but a kid.
Hello! Hello! Please! Hey, please! I'm down here! I'm stuck! I can't move!
I mean, the absolute terror in Tom's voice, just acting. The scene shows that this version of Peter Parker is so much more than a high-tech suit and more than a shadow of Iron Man himself. This internal strength and heart is what makes him Spider-Man. To wrap this up, just know, I'm not small-minded. I am aware of how different this version of Peter Parker is. Of course he's different, but that's not a bad thing, and it doesn't have to be a bad thing. For these past few years, we've seen characters from the comics we love finally have their time to shine on the big screen like Iron Man and Captain America. But at the same time, on-screen portrayals of heroes have changed from their comic counterparts. You'd be surprised at just how different both Tony and Steve could be in the comics. I mean, God, a good chunk of Steve's personality is a lot like Cyclops from the X-Men comics. Peter Parker's social connections and the world he lives in alters his circumstances to who he is as a person. That's just what makes Spider-Man so, well, amazing. He's an interchangeable character that can be altered based off of the current society that he's living in. He's a character that was made to grow, and that's exactly what Tom Holland's version is doing. I don't see why people aren't more excited to see Tom Holland's version grow. I mean, can you not see the vision that the MCU is trying to paint for us? It's the journey of growing up with Spider-Man, seeing the paths he takes as a character and see him develop into the hero we all know and love so well. Now, if you've been sitting here watching me for this long, rambling, you definitely have to be dedicated to the character of Spider-Man. But you might be asking yourself, okay, well, what's with her obsession over this fictional guy anyways? If it isn't obvious enough by now, I love Peter Parker. Peter Parker is my favorite character of all time. And I mean, yeah, not only have I made this entire video dedicated to him, but I wrote my college essay on the guy. Now, if you're extra curious, you're asking me, well, okay, how did this all start in the first place? When I was just a 3-month-old baby, my mom had to keep me occupied while she took care of a few things around the house. So, to keep me entertained, she decided to put a movie on. And, you know, you'd expect her to put something on like Thomas and Friends, Arthur, Sesame Street, all that great stuff, right? No. Well, my mom decided to pop in the DVD for the first ever Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire. Now, usually when I would watch the other children's shows or movies, I would always lose interest and eventually gain the attention of my mom to bother her. But during Spider-Man, my mom was shocked to see my eyes completely glued to the screen, completely forgetting that she was even there. She was even more surprised when I would laugh over the jump scares made by the Green Goblin appearing on screen. Spider-Man was the first movie I ever watched. True story. And from since then, I've loved Peter Parker for just nearly my entire life, almost exactly 18 years. I remember when my mom told me the story for the first time, I nearly lost my mind due to how much my love has only grown for him over the years. Anybody who knows me knows I'm obsessed with the guy, and anytime I see the opportunity to tell the story, I leap at the chance to do so because it's just so heartwarming to me. I would be a very different person if I hadn't grown up with Peter Parker. He's someone I've grown an emotional attachment to due to who he is as a person and what he stands for. Definitely taken some personality traits from him over time, and I'm so thankful for that. And that's the reason as to why I genuinely love each portrayal of him from Tobey, Andrew, and Tom. They've given me 3 sides to a character I adore and love, and I really couldn't thank them anymore for it. I guess you could say my main goal in making this video is to persuade people to just simply appreciate each Spider-Man actor for what they've given us for the past 20 years. And I hope this persuades at least just one person to stop putting down an actor who's played Spider-Man in order to uplift their favorite. They all represent different parts of Peter Parker and Spider-Man in their own way, and it's beautiful. Tobey's is nerdy, has great drama, and great emotional impact. Andrew handles the characterization and the love story incredibly well. And Tom showcases the growth and the lighthearted wackiness and goofiness of the Ditko era. I also want you guys to remember what Stan Lee has said about each actor who's played Spider-Man.
This man, Sam Raimi, and this guy, they made Spider-Man. It couldn't have been what it was without this guy. He is the greatest.
Thank you, Stan.
And I'm a jealous guy. I wanted to be Peter Parker. So if I say how good he is, you can believe me. Hey, thanks so much.
Hey Stan, how do you feel about the latest Spider-Man that just came out? What are your thoughts of how this one looks like or compared to the other ones?
I would say that this is probably among the top best Spider-Men we've ever had. He will go down as one of our best Spider-Men. Everything about him is perfect. The way he looks, the way he acts, speaks, his athletic ability, naturally, the man is perfect.
And with all that, enough said. However, if you ask me what my favorite Spider-Man film is, it's Into the Spider-Verse. That film is a masterpiece. Thank you guys so very much if you've made it to the end of this video. I put my blood, sweat, and tears into making this video, so please, please just like and subscribe. Also, in the middle of filming, I lost the audio from my mic while recording this, so I apologize from now for how garbage my sound quality is. Good lord. And an extra thank you to my friend Jules and my cousin Isabel for helping me film that insane intro. Hopefully I will be able to see you guys very, very soon. The next time you see me, I will have already watched No Way Home, which I'm watching in the next 3 hours, so wish me luck.
Okay, hi, Alyssa editing here. It's been 5 hours since I've watched Spider-Man No Way Home, so it's currently 3 a.m. I'm just popping in to say that anyone who's ever doubted Tom Holland as Peter Parker, I cannot wait to see you eat your words up. I can't wait. Alright, that's all I had to say. Bye-bye.
But anyways, thank you guys so much. We'll see you soon, and